What's going on, team? It's your buddy EFG here, and today I thought we would take a look at the other side of the spectrum. So Sega got that advantage right off the bat and put out the Genesis a whole year before there was any real competition. But Nintendo sat back during all of that and they said, no, Sega, no. You're not just going to walk in here and take over the 16-bit era. No. You forget that we have the plumber from down under smashing shit off his head, eating mushrooms and riding his dinosaur. You forget that we have gorillas swinging from vines and slapping alligators. We even have our own copy of Shaq fucking Fu. With that being said, and allegations as ridiculous as that, we can only be talking about one machine, and that is the Super Nintendo. Just like the Sega Genesis, this was a 16-bit machine that came with its ups and downs. And without further ado, this is going to be 10 Super Nintendo games that either made or broke my childhood.
Number 10.
Now, number 10 on this list can run you a high penny nowadays. It's called Run Saber. This was a game that was made to compete with Sega's very popular Strider game. Did it compete or not? I couldn't really tell you. That was a time when internet and social media and things like that didn't really exist, so it wasn't really so easy to follow and know what was good and what wasn't. You were just taking chances with whatever you bought and you hoped for the best. But with this game, I remember it being tons of fun, and it's always stuck with me.
Right off the bat, the game offers you 1 or 2 players, which is something that you hardly see in this day and age, and it can be really nice to have. You get the choice to play as one of 2 nameless nobodies. There is no storyline barely given, and the cutscene that you see in the intro pretty much just consists of pictures, so you're putting it together yourself. But as far as this goes, this is an action-packed game where you're scrolling to the right or the left, basically slashing, picking up items, and powering up your sword. It's fast-paced, you can cling to walls, the jumps are incredibly high that you do, and overall it's a pretty decent time. The game keeps the environments moving so you never feel like you're looking at the same boring background over and over again. All sorts of different things, from caves to the top of airplanes, you name it, it seems like you fighting it in this game. Overall, I recommend giving this game a shot if you've never heard of it before. It's overall good fun, and yeah, you'll have a blast, it's not too hard, and yeah, it's pretty much worth it.
Number 9.
The next game on this list is actually a funny one because personally I prefer the Sega Genesis version, but it didn't make it into the last video, so it's going to be put into this video because it deserves recognition. This game is produced by everyone's favorite developer, Let's Just Not, and quite frankly it's an example of, every now and then a company can make horrible games over and over and then they still get one golden turd, one game that stands out, and that game for them is Maximum Carnage. I only really have a couple of qualms with this game, nothing too severe, but it can sure get difficult real quick. This game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that follows the storyline of the Maximum Carnage comic book. You get the choice to either play as Spider-Man or Venom, not that it really makes any difference in the long run as you're going to get your ass kicked, because the difficulty in this game revs up super fast and before you know it, you don't know what's happening anymore. You fight everything from all sorts of different iconic characters from the comic book to these 2 bitches here, the first boss who whip you with their hair. This is not a fun experience at all to start off the game. There's also levels where you're climbing and swinging to break up the monotony. Overall, this isn't a bad Spider-Man game at all for its time and probably one of LJN's best made games. If you have a chance to check it out, do yourself a favor and give it a look. It's got a ripping soundtrack and you will definitely have a good time with it.
Number 8.
Next game on this list is going to be a game based off of a 90s TV show, and that was American Gladiators. And basically it was just a reality show where people were competing, and I don't even really remember what they won. They competed in different kinds of physical-based events, and if you ever watched this show growing up, it wasn't too bad, but playing the game is not the same at all. Right off the bat, the game gives you the choice of 1-to-1 or tournament mode. It's funny because I don't even think I've ever chosen tournament mode in my whole life when I was playing this. The game also lets you choose to be a male or a female, which is always cool. And right off the bat, it's off to the events. So the first one, you line yourself up here, and this is what happens. You're hit within the first seconds. I am honestly so shit at all these events, and I don't understand why. I get what you're supposed to do, but for some reason they just don't make sense. It's super cool though that this game allows you to play a rendition of all the events from the TV show all the way up to the Eliminator, and it's a nice touch that they tried to make it playable in some way.
Overall, if you're an American Gladiator fan for some reason, you can definitely check this game out and you might have a good time. For the rest of you, do yourselves a favor and just ignore this, as this is going to cause you more of a headache than anything else.
Number 7.
Next up, we're going to talk about another fighting game. Now, the Super Nintendo, just like the Sega Genesis, was loaded with all sorts of fighting games. But this one is special because it was actually an exclusive to the Super Nintendo. This is going to be Killer Instinct. Now, this was an arcade port to a console, obviously. Now, it might be a port, but it's definitely not arcade perfect. Either way, I remember having nothing but a great time with this. And yeah, it's worth playing to this day.
Killer Instinct. Nothing but good memories come from this. You're given all sorts of characters who have become iconic over the year, carried into all the way now to the amazing Xbox One game. As a fighting game, this game possesses graphics similar to Mortal Kombat and a control scheme similar as well, but more combo based than anything else. It's really cool the amount of environments as well as the great music that plays throughout them. If you're a fighting game fan and you've never gotten to experience the original Killer Instinct, even in this version and not its arcade version, I definitely recommend you check this out because this is a fighting game you will definitely not be disappointed in.
Number 6.
Next up is going to be a game that I feel is underrated almost, and that's Spawn. When this came out, I remember being taken back by it. I thought it was so dark and dreary looking, and quite frankly, there's been a few representations of Spawn throughout the years on different consoles, newer consoles, but I feel like realistically this is the best Spawn game that's ever existed. The other ones have all felt watered down or like they had no direction, but I think with Spawn, this is the only way to go.
This game has a very dark theme right off the bat, similar and very much so to the actual animated television show, which was very much better than the PG movie that came out later on in its life cycle. In the first level, if you just stand still, you can just watch enemies jump off and to their doom all day long. In terms of actual gameplay, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up that literally makes you feel like you are Spawn, as the moves are powerful, the controls are good, and the environments are very different, from hell all the way to the streets. You encounter all sorts of different bosses, iconic ones from Overkill, Violator, to Malebolgia himself. Some of these boss battles can be a little bit difficult at times, and a little bit repetitive even, but it's so cool that they were able to capture the magic of all these different iconic characters in one great game. If you've never played this before or seen it, you should definitely check it out because this is something you will not be disappointed in. It's creepy, has a negative vibe, and it's awesome.
Number 5.
So I remember being at the mall a lot as a kid and looking around the different stores, and I remember a couple of times I'd see every retailer would have their own setup for the newest games and consoles and whatever. And I remember looking across the store like this, and I remember going, "What game is that with these great graphics?" Turns out that this game would later become the Donkey Kong Country trilogy. My favorite one in this trilogy was Donkey Kong Country 2. I feel like this game possessed all the right tools as a platformer, level design, and everything about it is just nostalgic to this day, and all three of them, to be honest, are great playthroughs.
The gameplay picks up right off the original formula that made the first one so epic. But in this one, Donkey Kong is replaced by a female character called Dixie Kong, who has a great hair move she uses to glide through the air. It is so damn useful. The level variety takes you through the map, from carnivals to swamps, pirate ships to volcanoes. This game pretty much gives you all the environments. Not to mention, I would have to say that Donkey Kong has made up some of the most fluent controls in platformer history. Some would argue that point and say Mario, but I myself think Donkey Kong. If for some reason you never got to try these games when you were younger, or you're just interested to see what the past history is all about, this is an excellent game and I absolutely recommend it to anybody because I assure you, you're going to have a blast.
Number 4.
Alright, so the next game we're going to talk about is a fighting game that had a special place in my heart. When I was younger, I would always be going to the arcades and just facing people there, and that's pretty much where I learned how to play Street Fighter and got the hang of fighting games. So this is Street Fighter Alpha 2. I remember getting this and flipping my shit when I got it for Christmas one year because it was like mind-blowing to think that this could be on the Super Nintendo because I was so used to playing the arcade version. But it doesn't come without its shortcomings.
So it's time to pick your character. This game is actually pretty decently representative of the arcade version, surprisingly enough, which was big at the time. So the fight loads up and everything is looking good. But then the worst thing happens.
What the heck is that? Okay, you know what? Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to take away anything from the fact that this is on the Super Nintendo, but this is inexcusable. I mean, the game is partially plagued with load screens from the bat, but this is the worst possible spot you could have put in one. You know, it would have been better if you just selected your character, and then it just froze there for a few seconds. But like right when it says fight, come on.
Once you get past that tragedy, this actually isn't a bad game at all. It possesses on-point controls and graphics very similar to the arcade version. Coupled in with great theme music that represents the arcade version, it ties it right into the feel and makes you feel like you're playing that arcade version. At the time when this came out, there was nothing like it, and it was mind-blowing to think that this awesome game could be on the Super Nintendo. If you've never tried this out before, I encourage you to give it a shot because it's still super fun to this day and completely playable.
Number 3.
Racing games have never really been my forte. I mean, nowadays, there are some dope ones out there that are just amazing with graphics and gameplay and whatever else. But back in the day, they were few and far between as far as like good ones went. But you know, there was always one that stood out to me, and it spawned so many sequels all the way up to nowadays that it's incredible. And that original one was Super Mario Kart. I can remember having tons of fun with this game, whether it was with friends or just racing by myself. And I'll never forget it.
You're given the choice of 8 characters from the Mario universe, all with their own stats and attributes. You're given the choice of 3 major championships to race for, all with varying levels in each one. The controls are smooth and fluent, and grabbing the power-ups and knocking somebody out of a position is always a blast. They also had competitive multiplayer in this, which was sure to start some fights between you and your friends. If you never got a chance to check out this awesome racing game when you were younger, give it a shot because it is nothing but fun.
Number 2.
We've come down to the number 2 spots. It's always a hard decision thinking what's going to be at the end of these lists because there's so many games to talk about. Playing so many throughout the years, it's hard to really narrow it down. Number 2 on this list is going to be a game that, first off, I remember being nothing but lost in for hours. I could never figure out where to go most of the time. With that being said, I have tons of fond memories of it too. This game is Super Metroid. Many people would call this one of the flagship titles of the system, and rightfully so, because it possesses all the right qualities to give you a great time.
This game starts off with what has to be one of the creepiest and most cinematic intros in the Super Nintendo. I remember this part was giving me nightmares when I was a kid. I'm not even joking you. This was the real deal back then. And the game wastes no time at all because literally within seconds of starting it up, you're in your first boss battle with this big bastard. And honestly, if you're not careful, this guy will end your day. And this is just the very first part of the game. Right after that, you have to get out of this damn place, and this has got to be one of the most nerve-wracking and fast-paced parts I've ever seen. This will get your heart racing for sure as shit is falling down all around you, and you got to get the hell out of there before it's lights out. Definitely an amazing game, and you should definitely check it out.
Number 1.
So the number 1 video on this list is a game that I'm pretty sure everybody and their grandma has played at some point or another. This is Super Mario World. I remember that this was the pack-in game for my Super Nintendo when I had one, and I did a walkthrough of it on my channel not too long ago, and it's just fond memories from the beginning to the end. It gets super difficult though towards the end, so be prepared if you're a newcomer.
I don't know if there's anything more iconic than this opening screen. If you were out and about in the early 90s, you definitely saw this playing on a TV somewhere without a doubt. The gameplay is platforming at its finest, taking you through all sorts of different areas, and introducing Yoshi for the first time in the Mario games, adding a whole new dynamic to the gameplay itself. I'm sure everybody's played this at one point or another, but if you've been living under a rock and never got to try it, give it a shot because it's absolutely essential and a great part of video game history.
So team, that was 10 Super Nintendo games that either made or broke my childhood. There's endless memories to talk about and tons of games to play. The list could go on and on, but we gotta get it to an end somewhere. Let me know if any of these games gave you nightmares or great times when you were younger. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll be back soon with more. But until then, peace.